People like to say the market has changed. They talk about screens replacing ticker tape, machines replacing men, algorithms replacing judgment. Whenever I hear that, I can't help but smile, because I know something they don't. The market never changes, only the costumes do. I have watched men ruin themselves in every generation. In 1907, in 1929, and in every so-called modern era since, the cause has always been identical. People forget that the market is nothing more than human nature laid bare. Greed, fear, hope, ignorance translated into numbers, moving so fast that most minds never slow down enough to understand what they are seeing. When I was young, I stood in bucket shops with a few coins in my pocket, money I could not afford to lose. The air was thick with chalk dust, and every new quote made my heart pound harder. That was where I learned what no school, no book, no teacher could ever explain. Price tells the story before the news ever does. That was my first real lesson. No formulas, no tricks, just truth. If you want to catch a breakout before it becomes obvious, you must learn to see what the crowd cannot. You must train your eyes to read price itself, not the headlines, because breakouts do not begin with noise. They begin with silence. I remember the first time I truly understood this. The calm before a move so powerful it alters your entire thinking. It was 1901, Union Pacific. The market was quiet, dangerously quiet. Volume was drying up, yet price refused to fall. Every small dip was met with steady, unemotional buying. That is strength, not excitement, not fireworks, but refusal. Price stood its ground, the way a general refuses to retreat. That day I learned my first principle. Accumulation always comes before revolution. When strong hands are at work, the market does not shout. It whispers. The movements are small, deliberate, hidden inside boredom, but I had learned how to listen. I watched the range tighten. I watched price refuse to break down. I noticed the faint increase in activity when no one else cared. That is the seed of every breakout, growing beneath the surface while the rest of the market yawns. Most traders wait for confirmation. I never did. By the time the newspapers start writing, the opportunity is already gone. At that point, professionals are selling to the public. I have seen this pattern repeat in every bull market of my lifetime. The crowd always arrives near the end. They chase, they panic, they buy high and sell low. Those who understand silence are already positioned. They are no longer acting. They are waiting. Understand this clearly. Breakouts do not reward impulsive men. They reward prepared ones. The market is a mirror. It reflects your discipline or your weakness without mercy. Chase noise, and you will always be its victim. Learn to recognize stillness. Learn to sense when price has been quiet for too long, and you will know something is coming. This is where the first secret truly lies. The most powerful moves are born out of boredom. When others grow restless, I study. When they give up, I wait, because when the market appears dead, it is usually only sleeping. The first secret is patience. Not the kind spoken about casually, but the kind that hurts, the kind that cuts through greed, the kind that keeps you from acting too early and from exiting too soon. This is the dividing line between the crowd and the professional. The crowd craves excitement. The professional seeks opportunity, and opportunity never announces itself. It hides in quiet bases, in strong structures, in prices that refuse to break down. That is where I remain. In the silence before expansion. Most traders never learn to listen. They see numbers, not language. Because of that, they miss the entire message. When I truly studied price, when I observed it deeply, I began to see emotion behind every fluctuation. Panic has a rhythm. Confidence has one as well. A stock does not simply rise or fall. It speaks. And if you watch long enough, you begin to understand what the crowd is thinking before it acts. That brings me to the second lesson. Watch how price behaves when the news is bad. It sounds simple, but it is the greatest test of strength there is. Anyone can be optimistic when headlines are positive, but real, lasting breakouts are born when price refuses to collapse, even when it has every reason to. In 1915, Bethlehem Steel was surrounded by rumors and de-war headlines. Fear dominated the room. While others sold, I watched the stock hold steady. Every decline was absorbed. Every wave of selling met with calm buying. That was when it became clear to me. Strength that ignores fear is the only strength worth following. When bad news cannot destroy a stock, something powerful is forming. This is not chance. This is informed money at work. Quiet, patient, professional. That is why I learned never to judge the market by its noise, but by its ability to absorb noise. If price refuses to bend under pressure, it is not weak. It is coiling. That is the signal. The crowd reacts to fear. The professional studies reaction. You do not need inside information to see this. The market provides everything if you learn its language, but remember this. The market never repeats itself in an obvious way. The moment a pattern becomes clear to everyone is the moment it loses its edge. That is why I never followed reputation. I followed behavior. And that leads to the third lesson. Volume reveals conviction. Price can deceive for a time. But volume always tells the truth. When a real breakout is forming, volume does not explode suddenly. It builds steadily, like a tide gathering strength. When price compresses into a narrow range and activity begins to rise rhythmically, professionals are accumulating. Quietly, before the crowd becomes aware, amateurs believe the breakout occurs when resistance is crossed. Professionals know the move has already begun. When long before that moment, they have seen the footprints, selling pressure drying up, bids becoming firm, participation increasing beneath the surface. When you learn to recognize these signs, you stop chasing moves and start anticipating them. I remember an early trade in Anaconda copper. The stock had gone nowhere for weeks. Most called it dead money. I watched the volume. Quiet, steady, deliberate. Not enough to attract attention, but enough to tell me that serious interests were preparing. Days later, price broke free and never looked back. The crowd called it unexpected. I called it inevitable. That is the art of reading the market. Anticipation, not reaction. Most traders chase movement because movement makes them feel alive. But the best trades do not begin with excitement. They begin with discipline, with pressure beneath the surface, with a heartbeat only patience can detect. Volume murmurs before it speaks. If you hear it early, you already have an advantage, but danger follows success. Once the breakout is visible, emotion floods in. Volume surges. Greed fills the room. Everyone believes they have discovered the opportunity. This is when professionals begin distributing, selling into the excitement they helped create. The market has always worked this way. That is why early recognition is the only lasting edge. When the crowd arrives, the advantage is gone, so understand this. You cannot predict the market, but you can prepare for it. You cannot know the future, B. You can recognize when the present is quietly signaling what comes next. Price does not lie, but it demands interpretation. It will not tell you when. It will only tell you soon. When whispers become murmurs, when price tightens with energy, when strength shows itself through refusal, that is the moment to prepare. Not to rush, because patience without timing is simply another form of error. This leads to the fourth lesson, the one few ever master. Every major move has a rhythm. A pulse that cannot be drawn, only felt. If you have watched long enough, if you have trained your perception, you will feel when that rhythm shifts. That is where timing lies, not in guessing, not in certainty, but in sensing conviction replacing hesitation. A breakout begins a day before it becomes obvious. Most traders wait for safety. A clean signal, a clear candle. There is no safety in speculation, only opportunity. An opportunity never waits for comfort. My greatest trades were entered when the move was still unclear. One day before certainty. That is where courage and understanding meet. I could feel it. Selling dried up. Bids crept higher. Every dip was bought instantly. This cannot be automated. It cannot be fully explained. It can only be learned through observation. The market is alive. It breathes. It hesitates. It surges. And when you have watched long enough, you feel its pulse. When I sensed that change, I never rushed. I entered lightly. I tested. That is how professionals operate. They measure depth before committing. And when price confirmed, when volume expanded, when resistance finally gave way, that is when I pressed my position. That is how great moves are captured. Catching a move before the story is written always been the real game. Most traders crave certainty. They want proof, confirmation, comfort, and that is precisely why they fail. Certainty is the enemy of profit. The moment everything looks obvious is the moment the opportunity has already passed. That is why the fourth lesson was never about prediction. It has always been about readiness. When you have studied the range long enough, understood how price behaves under pressure, watched volume breathe in and out, and observed how the market reacts to bad news, there comes a moment when doing nothing begins to feel unnatural. That moment is not confusion, it is alignment. That is when you are meant to act. An early breakout is not something you see with your eyes. It is something you feel. And that feeling is not intuition pulled from thin air. It is memory. Thousands of hours spent watching the market deceive, hesitate, fake strength, fake weakness, and then slowly expose its true intent. After enough repetition, your hand knows what to do before your mind can justify it. That is timing, not guessing, not gambling, but disciplined response to a signal most people miss because they are distracted by noise. Yet there is still one lesson left, and it is the hardest of all. Because hearing correctly means nothing if you cannot stay correctly. That is the fifth lesson. Real profit is made by sitting. Any amateur can buy near the right level. Very few can hold in the right way. The market has a cruel habit of testing you after you have done everything right. You enter well. The move begins. Then comes a pullback, a shakeout, a whisper of doubt, the urge to protect a small gain. This is where most traders fail, not because they were wrong, but because they were right too early, too fearful, too small in their thinking. The greatest gains of my life did not come from constant action. They came from holding conviction when everyone else had abandoned it. When a true breakout begins, when price pushes beyond resistance, with real participation, when emotion floods the room and excitement becomes contagious, that is not the moment to sell. That is the moment to set, because that is when the public will buy tomorrow at prices you recognize today. The market rewards the few who can remain still while panic and excitement consume the crowd. Holding quietly while others shout is the signature of the professional. In 1929, people called it luck. It was not luck. It was preparation. I had already seen the signs: exhaustion, arrogance, reckless speculation. When the moment arrived, I did not react emotionally. I executed what experience had already taught me. While others froze, I acted. This is the truth about breakouts, upward or downward. They are not born from chaos. They are born from order, constructed quietly over time, waiting for a single fracture to release accumulated energy. And if you have trained yourself to recognize that tension, you will be ready when it breaks. Remember this clearly. The strongest breakouts begin in boredom. True strength reveals itself by surviving bad news. Volume exposes conviction before price ever does. The real breakout begins a day before it becomes obvious, and lasting profit belongs to those who can sit quietly. You will not find these lessons in textbooks. They cannot be fully explained with words. They must be earned through observation, failure, and survival. The market is the greatest teacher there is, but it charges tuition relentlessly. Every tick, every hesitation, every false start carries a lesson written in motion. You either learn to read it or you pay for it. So when you open your charts tomorrow, do not chase noise. Do not search for excitement. Look for silence. Look for defiance. Look for that quiet strength that refuses to break. That is where the next move is forming, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the few who can stand still long enough to feel it. Because the market never shouts first. It whispers the same message every time. The next move has already begun, and here is the part most people never speak about, because it sounds simple but is brutally difficult to live by. Once you are in a position, once the market begins to move in your favor, the real battle no longer comes from price. It comes from within you. The market tests you in stages. First it tests your patience before entry. Then it tests your courage at the moment of entry. And finally, it tests your character after you are right. This is where most fortunes are quietly destroyed, when price starts to move. The mind immediately reaches again for certainty. It wants reassurance. It wants confirmation that the move will continue. But the market never makes promises. It only offers probabilities. Professionals understand this. They do not need constant validation. They already did the work before the trade. They already accepted the risk. So when volatility appears, they do not panic. They observe. One of the oldest tricks the market uses is speed. A sharp move in your favor followed by a sudden pause, or worse, a violent pullback. This is designed to awaken memory, pain memory, fear memory. It reminds you of all the times you gave profits back. In that moment, your mind tells you to protect yourself, to take something, to lock it in. This instinct feels intelligent. It feels responsible. But most of the time, it is precisely what prevents you from ever holding. A truly great trade, the market knows where your pain lies. It also knows where your comfort lies. That is why the strongest trends never move in straight lines. They move in waves. They breathe. They advance, then hesitate. They shake out weak hands before continuing. If price moved smoothly upward, everyone would succeed. The discomfort is not an accident. It is the filter. Professionals accept this discomfort before it arrives. They expect it. They do not label it as danger. They recognize it as structure. When a pullback appears after a breakout, the amateur asks, "Is this failing?" The professional asks, "Is this normal?" That single difference in perspective changes everything. One response is emotional. The other is observational. Most traders also misunderstand time. They believe profit should appear quickly. If it doesn't, they assume something is wrong, but time is part of the trade. Strong trends often begin slowly. They frustrate. They move just enough to keep you involved, but not enough to reward you emotionally. This is intentional. The market is not designed for your comfort. It is designed for efficiency. The largest moves I ever held felt boring for long stretches. Days passed where nothing seemed to happen. Price drifted. Volume quieted. This is where impatience begins to speak again. Nothing is happening. Maybe I was wrong. But professionals understand that inactivity after a breakout is not weakness. It is digestion. The market is absorbing supply. It is preparing for the next expansion. If you exit during this phase, you do not lose money. You lose opportunity. An opportunity lost quietly leaves a deeper mark over time than money lost loudly. Because you remember it. You remember being right. You remember leaving too early. And that memory follows you into future trades, puss. Hing you to chase, to force, to overcompensate. That is why holding is a skill entirely separate from entry. Entry is technical. Holding is psychological. You can learn entries from books. Holding can only be learned through experience and discipline. It requires trusting your preparation more than your emotions. There is also a moment when holding is no longer correct. Professionals understand this as well. They do not marry positions. They do not hold blindly. They observe behavior when strength turns into excess, when volume becomes frantic instead of steady, when price accelerates without pause, when the crowd arrives emotionally. These are not signs of continuation. They are warnings. Distribution rarely looks like collapse at first. It looks like excitement. Headlines appear. Stories spread. Everyone suddenly understands the move. That is when risk quietly increases. Professionals reduce exposure into strength, not into weakness. They sell when it feels emotionally hardest, not when it feels comfortable. This is why the crowd is always late on both sides. They buy when certainty feels strongest and sell when fear becomes unbearable. Professionals operate in the opposite emotional climate. They enter when uncertainty dominates and exit when confidence becomes crowded. None of this can be done without rules. And those rules must exist before the trade begins, not during it. Decisions made in the middle of movement are emotional decisions. Professionals decide in advance. What behavior invalidates their idea? Not a number. Behavior, loss of structure, failure to absorb selling, changes in volume character. These are signals, not feelings. One more thing most traders never consider is identity. The market forces you to confront who you are. If you seek validation, you will trade for approval. If you crave excitement, you will trade too often. If you fear being wrong, you will exit too early. The chart exposes these weaknesses without mercy. That is why trading is not merely a financial pursuit. It is psychological training. Over time, if you survive long enough, you begin to change. You become less reactive, less emotional. You stop needing the market to entertain you. You stop trying to prove anything. Trading becomes quieter, slower, more deliberate. And paradoxically, that is when results begin to improve. The market does not reward intelligence alone. It rewards emotional control. It rewards preparation. It rewards the ability to sit still while others rush. It rewards those who understand that missing a trade is not failure, but forcing. One always is. If you take anything from this, let it be this. The market is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a process to be respected. Every great move leaves clues long before it happens. In structure, in volume, in reaction, in silence. Your task is not to predict. Your task is to observe, prepare, and respond with discipline. Most people will never do this. They will always search for shortcuts, always demand certainty, always chase excitement, and the market will gladly take their money, quietly, repeatedly, without emotion. But if you choose differently, if you train your eyes, your patience, and your discipline, you begin to see a different market. A slower one, a clearer one, a market that speaks softly but truthfully. And once you learn its language, you realize something profound. The opportunity was never hidden. Only the ability to sit still long enough to recognize it was missing.